Welcome to day 1 of the Learning to Crochet Challenge. This is going to be a few days of just hopefully a lot of learning and a lot of growth as you learn how to actually take crochet stitches and yarn and turn them into your first project. So to get started, we need to look at what you actually need to make this successful, because not all of the tools and yarns out there are going to be suitable for you as a beginner. So I'm going to show you the differences right now, starting with yarn. There are a lot of yarns out there that are not going to be good for you as a beginner, as awesome as they are. We want to focus on simplicity, and we want to stay away from things that look really fancy and really amazing, because they're not going to make it easy for you to see your stitches right away. Here's what I mean by that. Alright, so here's one yarn that is not going to be good for a beginner. This is a sachet yarn, and as you can see, it's got more of a net ribbon texture instead of a simple, twisted yarn structure. That's not going to be good for a beginner. Another thing you're going to want to stay away from are yarns that have a lot of different textures in one. Things like art yarn. As you can see, this one is really fuzzy in places and really silky in others. So I'm going to put this up here really close. This is going to overcomplicate things as you learn your first couple of stitches. So that's another one. Another one that you're not going to want to mess with are really squishy yarns. This blanket yarn is really, really popular, but because it's so squishy and has this chenille texture, I don't think it's going to be the best choice for you. The same goes for this one. This is all squishy. This one actually has some variation, just like this other one I showed you. But this one is just straight squishy. And another one that's really squishy is the velvet yarn. This has been really popular lately at the time I'm recording this, but please don't try to do it for your very first project. It's very slippery as well as being squishy. Alright, the last one I'm going to show you right here is this real fuzzy yarn. These are just all yarns that I have. There's plenty of other examples, but this yarn is really, really fuzzy, if you can see that. It's supposed to look like a mohair type yarn, but all of this fuzz is going to kind of make it harder for a beginner, because the fuzz can actually get stuck more easily, and again, it's just not quite as easy to see your stitches. So please don't pick something like this. If you're going to the store trying to pick out your first yarn, these are things you want to stay away from. You also want to stay away from the fur look yarns right now, because it is literally impossible a lot of times to see your stitches with those, as cool as they are. The fur yarns and the eyelash yarns that have a lot of really long fuzzies coming off of them. Okay? A couple of my examples also have all different colors. This isn't as big of an issue, but I would suggest you start with a solid colored yarn, because again, you just want to make it as simple and easy as possible for you while you're learning your stitches. Okay? So with all of that said, here is an example of a yarn that I would recommend. Right here. Very basic, very simple. This yarn is called Cotton Ease, and it's from Lion Brand. You do not have to use cotton, even though we are working on a washcloth. If you pick up something that is acrylic, that's perfectly fine. It might be more suitable for a dusting cloth or for a pot holder instead of a washcloth, but you don't have to use cotton. This is actually a 50-50 cotton blend, I believe. But the main things I want you to notice about this yarn is that it's a solid color. It is a very simple texture, just your very basic yarn. And it's also a lighter color. That's something I forgot to mention. You probably don't want to start your first project in black or very, very dark colors, because some people have a hard time seeing the stitches with those as well. So I picked a nice light color. If you're interested at all, this is the color Almond. If you want to look for this exact yarn, I will link it. I will also leave a link for my favorite online source for yarn. I don't know if they have this, but they have many, many wonderful yarns. You could find something if you're shopping online there. All right, so those are our yarns, or the criteria you should look for with your yarn. Whatever yarn you choose, if you get it from a shop and it has a label like this, it's going to have a little icon on the label right here. It looks like a skein of yarn, and this has a 4 on it. This is just a rating, or on a scale of how thick the yarns are. So a 4 is a medium. This is also called heavy worsted or Aran type yarn. And this is what I'm using for our project. The reason you want to pay attention to this is because it will make a difference with what hook size you want to use. So any yarn with this type of a label should have on it the hook size you want to use. This says H8. So I'll go over hooks in a minute, but it should be on the label. If you're using a yarn that is about this thick or this weight, then the hook size that I pick should work for you as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to go over hooks. All right, so let me adjust this a little bit. I'm going to go over hook sizes now, and just like with yarns, I'm going to give you a range of criteria that I feel are going to help you be more successful as you learn to crochet. But I did forget one thing with yarn, so I'm going to go over that really quick. And that is that even though I am using something this thick for yarn, and I would not recommend you go with something really, really thin. I'd recommend this weight of yarn because it's really common, and as you work with your stitches, they're going to be big enough that they're easy to see. So I would recommend you get something about this weight. But if you go to the store and you're picking out yarn, if you also want to get something a little bit bulkier to have on hand, that can help you as you work on your projects, and maybe as soon as you're done with this challenge, you want to try another simple pattern. Having a bulky yarn on hand is going to help you have some quick wins and have some success, because the thicker your yarn is, the bigger your stitches are going to be, and the faster you're going to be able to make something. So that's just a little trick. If you, I know some people are actually far away from stores sometimes, from craft stores. So if you're going in for a special trip before you start this challenge, and you get something, again, really basic like this for our washcloth, or if you're doing a scarf for a scarf, then I'd recommend, if you can, go ahead and get something a little bit bulkier, again, without a lot of texture to it, because as you play around with learning these stitches, a bulky yarn is going to be a nice second option to work with. Okay, so that's it for yarns. Now for hooks, I'm going to go over a few things about the type of hook you should get, what they're made out of, and what sizes I think you should stick with for a little while. If you decide to go in and get a set of hooks, or you already have a set of hooks, that's great. Just make sure you've got something in this in these moderate sizes that I'm going to show you. Or if you just want to get one hook to get yourself started, then I'll kind of give you an idea of what hook size you should get. So here's some hooks. I have mostly metal ones here. I have one plastic one right here, and you'll also see hooks sometimes made out of bamboo. I don't have any of those here though right now. You do not need to get hooks with any kind of fancy handles on them or anything like that, unless you have maybe issues that, like a carpal tunnel, if you're prone to carpal tunnel, or you have other issues that might make these movements painful for you over time, then a more ergonomic handle might be a good idea for you right off the bat. But for most people who are just learning, just trying this out, these really basic shaped hooks are going to be just fine. Okay, the bigger issue for most people is going to be the size. So that's what I'm going to go over. You can see that I have a few different sizes right here. And just like with our yarn, let me see if I can adjust this really quick. So you can see these are really, really up close. There we go, there we go. So just with, like with our yarns, we want to stay away from extremes. Okay, so I've got these up nice here, so they look pretty big for you, but you don't want to have, let me adjust this back, you don't want to have extremely large hooks or extremely small hooks. So this is an example of a hook that you can see in my hands. It's pretty small. This is going to be for much lacier threads and yarns most of the time. So this is an example of something that I think would be too small starting out. Okay, and then this hook, you can see, is much more substantial in my hand. This is an example of something that's on the big side. Okay, so if you get some yarn that is really bulky and it says it needs this size, which is an N, then you can go ahead and get it. That's fine. It's not going to be as much of an issue as this one. Okay, but I still think this is a little bit on the big side for a beginner. Okay, because if you are working on some stitches and your stitches get a little tight with something this big, I think it might become more of a struggle than it should be right away. Okay, so here's what we're left with. All right, this is a size K, and this is about as big as I think you should go for just starting out. It's a very common size, but it's a little bit on the big side, so I'm going to say don't go bigger than this for now. Okay, all of the hooks, by the way, have a letter name, like N, K. The one we're going to end up working with is an H, at least if you decide to get the same size as me. I'm working with an H size hook. And they are also named for their diameter in millimeters. So for K, it actually does not have millimeters, and I don't have them memorized. Okay, so the size below that is I, or I guess you'd have HIJK. So there is a size in between here because it does go right along with the alphabet. It's not too complicated that way. But if you have a size I, then that's 5.5 millimeters. So some hooks have them both labeled on it and some don't, but they have names according to a letter size and as well as a size in millimeters. But I usually just look at the letter size. It just depends. All right. Then we have these left. This is a G, the G hook. And this is the size right above that, which is an H. These are both H's. And I'm going to use them to compare our materials really quick because this hook is metal. All of my other ones have been metal as well. And this is plastic. Both of them work fine. So if you already have some hooks and the only issue is that they're not metal hooks or you have plastic or bamboo hooks, that's totally fine. I do prefer, and I think it's a little bit better, to have metal hooks over plastic hooks. The plastic hooks are just really lightweight, and it's mostly a matter of personal preference, but I usually try not to use the plastic hooks. Okay, if you are using plastic hooks in smaller sizes, they just end up being more flexible, and I think it's better if they don't bend on you. So I would recommend metal hooks, and they're really common, so wherever you see hooks, you should see these. However, something that I don't have, but that you may want to look into, are bamboo hooks. I really like the way that bamboo hooks are look. I like the way they look. They do tend to grab the yarn a little bit more. Yarn does not slide on these hooks as we're doing our stitches. They doesn't slide on bamboo quite as much as on metal. So this really depends on what works better for you. If you're just starting out, it might help you to have a hook that grabs at the yarn a little bit more. Or you may find that it's easier for you to have something that slides and glides on it very easily, like metal. So if you go to the store and you're looking at bamboo versus metal hooks, it's really a matter of preference. You might try getting the same size in both of them, in a bamboo hook and a metal hook, and try and see what you think. But I'm going to stick with a metal hook, and the hook size that I'm going to use for my yarn is an H, because that is the size that is recommended on the label for this yarn, and it also just happens to be the size that I end up using most of the time. So this is the hook you'll see in the videos, and if you have another hook size, but it's pretty close to an H, like if you have a G, which is a little bit smaller, or an I, which is a little bit bigger, you can still try it with the yarn that you have if that's the only thing keeping you from working on the project is the hook size. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I would start by trying it, and if you feel like it's causing issues, you can always grab another size. Alright, so we've got our yarn, we've got our hook. The only other things that you need for this project are some kind of pair of scissors. If you already have a decent pair of scissors at home, you do not need to buy another pair to learn how to crochet. I do like having this little pair of scissors for carrying around with me, because it's so nice to be able to just take your crochet projects wherever you go. I also have some other little yarn snippers that are pretty much just made for yarn. But any decent pair of scissors that is going to cut easily and it's not going to tear up your yarn, it works just fine. And then finally, let me see where it went. The only other thing that you might want to grab if you go out and get stuff for this challenge is a large eyed needle like this one. This is called a tapestry needle because it has a nice blunt tip, and it's good for yarn. But if you have a needle large enough for maybe sewing, maybe in your sewing supplies, that has a sharp point, then that still works just fine. And if you can't find this or you don't want to get one, that's totally okay. I just use it later on when I teach you how to weave in your ends, and I prefer this to the other method that I'll show you. So that's what that's for. Alright, so that is all that you need for this challenge. Those are the tips, the suggestions that I would make if you're going out and you're able to look around and actually just decide on materials for this project, or if you already have some things stashed away, hopefully that'll help you kind of decide what to use. So if you are just going to do the washcloth or the dust rag, whatever you want to call it, with me, then a skein of yarn about this big is going to be more than enough. In fact, you'll be able to get a couple of washcloths out of something this size. The yarns are normally listed by yards, and so this is a really common size of a skein of yarn to get. This one is 207 yards, and it also has it in meters. It's almost 200 meters. And it also has it in ounces on the label. So you don't have to look at all of that. If you're just want to make sure you have enough to do one washcloth, then anything over about 100 yards is going to be plenty. If you think that you might end up wanting to make a scarf instead of a washcloth, because you're just going to want to do more of the crocheting on your first project, then I would get at least 2 skeins of yarn, and that'll be enough for you. Okay? So your assignment for today is to simply gather everything you'll need in one place, whether it's already around the house or whether you need to plan a trip to run out and get some things. You just get everything you need: hook, some yarn, make sure you have some scissors, and if you want to grab that tapestry or that large blunt tipped needle to make it easier when we weave in our ends, that's the last thing you'll need. So grab those things together. You do not need to spend a lot. It might only take you between $5 and $10 is plenty for what we're doing. And I will see you tomorrow when we learn our very first stitch.